Congo has been experiencing a civil war on and off for 40 years roughly. The part of Congo that we work in is a part called North Kivu. North Kivu is the worst hit of that. According to the United Nations, there's about 70 different armed groups in the area. It's a dangerous place. It's a deeply impoverished place, one of the poorest places in the world. We began training a group of pastors there maybe 5 years ago or so. One of the pastors that went through that training, his name is Pastor Kalima. Up to this point, he had pastored one sort of smaller church and had just been faithful in caring for that, but he never really thought beyond the church walls, so to speak. And so he went back to his church and said, let's begin to engage our community. He called a community meeting, and they began talking about what were the greatest needs that they have in their community. Well, they didn't have a school. And so the community together agreed that if they could have a school, that would be a tremendous blessing, so the children can learn to read and write and have chances of better futures than many of the parents have. Well, Pastor Kalima said, I don't have any resources to build a school, but there's something every one of us can do. And so there were some parents that agreed to go out into the jungle and cut down trees and turn them into planks. Someone else had a little kind of a metal roof tiles. Others had maybe a couple of books or some paper. Through this endeavor that started with the church, we're able to build a school. Today that school has, I believe, over 500 students. They recently built a secondary school. That gave the people in the church and in the community great hope that some of these big issues that they have, they can solve them themselves. Next, they began to look at what are some of the people who are most in need of help in our community. They realized that there were a number of elderly people in the community who really were struggling to feed themselves. They weren't able to go out in the field any longer and work for themselves. And along came a man from the community who was a little bit better off than most, and he had a quite large field that he didn't use. And he said he would lend it out to the church rent it to them essentially for 1 chicken a year. And so they got this field and they began growing eggplants and some other vegetables. And with that, they were able to provide for the elderly. Pastor Kalima's confidence really began to grow, and so he also began to train up some of the elders in his church, husband and wife couples, and began to send them out to start new churches. And as of recently, they have started 11 new churches in 11 new communities. Some of those communities I've been to, and there never was a church in these places before. In one community, they went out and the first thing they did was they built a little tiny home, they built a little tiny church, and then they began to grow cabbage. And most in the community had never seen cabbage before, and so they came and asked them, what are these soccer balls sitting around in your field? And they began to explain that this is a very nutritious food. It grows very good in our soil, in our environment here, and they began to give out seeds and taught people how to do this. Now from that, they expanded in that community to also build a fish farm, and we were able to provide some training on how to raise tilapia in a good way, and right now they have quite a lot of tilapia that are able to give food probably to the typical family in that community once every 2 weeks, but that's down from once a quarter before. And so, getting that protein into their diet is an enormous blessing. And of course, that has meant that church has grown immensely, because the pastor and the pastor's wife that moved there from that other town and settled with that community have now become very respected members of that community. A couple of years ago, the chief in that village, through the work of that pastor couple, gave his life to Jesus and was baptized publicly. And so you see, like, all these things are building momentum one upon the other, and faith begins to well up in people as they see that God is giving them success through the work that they're setting out to do to be really the hands and feet of Jesus to their community.